A lot of people have been throwing some serious shade at the new M1 iMac, saying that it isn't for professional use. Well, I've been using it for a month now, and I disagree. Now, are there some pro level features that I'd like to see added to the next iMac? Yeah, of course, but that didn't keep me from making this my new go-to computer for 4K and 6K video editing, live streaming, Photoshop work, and just so much more. Let's talk about some of the issues that people have with the M1 iMac and why I don't think you should worry about them. It only has 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, especially compared to my old 2013 iMac that I'm coming from that has 32 gigabytes of RAM, or my work iMac Pro that has 64 gigabytes of RAM. So 16 gigabytes of RAM sounds like a significant downgrade, right? But the way the M1 is designed is as a system on a chip. So everything works extremely fast and efficiently together because the processor doesn't have to communicate between different modules and components in the computer. It's all built together on the same piece of silicon, one single chip. That's pretty cool. In fact, editing speeds are actually much better than my previous 2013 i5 iMac, where I could never play back H.265 10-bit footage in Final Cut Pro or B-RAW footage in DaVinci Resolve smoothly at all. It would always drop frames and stutter, and it just sometimes wouldn't even play back at all. Now I can drop footage right into Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve, and without waiting for it to transcode or optimize the media, I can just hit play and it plays back smoothly at full 24 frames per second without dropping any frames. This is insane. The iMac Pro that I use at work with an Intel Xeon processor and 64 gigabytes of RAM that costs about $10,000 performs very similar to this, and it's about 5 times the price. This is just so crazy. It actually makes sense why Apple discontinued the iMac Pro lineup, because if they kept it the way that it currently is, the new M1 iMac would cannibalize all their own sales because it's such a high performer. Now let's take a look at the data. I used Geekbench to run a few benchmarks comparing the new M1 iMac, my old 2013 iMac that I have sitting over there, and the iMac Pro. So first off, my old i5 iMac with 32 gigabytes of RAM came in with a single core score of 883 and a multi-core score of 2,965. My work Intel Xeon iMac with 64 gigabytes of RAM came in with a single core score of 1,146 and a multi-core score of 9,871. It clearly blows my old iMac way out of the water. Now, the new M1 iMac came in with the single core score of 1,741 and a multi-core score of 7,673. So it actually outperformed the iMac Pro in single core performance and came very close in terms of multi-core performance. This is, again, just so insane. The Intel Xeon processor was built for industrial server use, and this little M1 chip is holding its own and punching way above its weight class here. Let's look at GPU performance now. My 2013 iMac has a low metal score of just 2,412. The M1 iMac has a metal score 10 times better than that at 21,981. And finally, the iMac Pro has a metal score of 60,282. So clearly, the iMac Pro is the winner in terms of GPU performance. So if you're doing heavy 3D rendering and a lot of work in After Effects or something like Cinema 4D, the M1 iMac may not be your first choice. But when it comes to heavy video editing, color grading, and everything like that, the M1 iMac performs beautifully. It really holds its own weight. When comparing export time of a 9-minute 4K video from Final Cut Pro, my 2013 iMac took 15 minutes and 39 seconds to export, whereas on the M1 iMac, it only took 11 minutes and 41 seconds to export the same video. So 4 minutes less time. Now that doesn't sound like a massive amount of time saved, but when you're talking about exporting longer videos or multiple videos at once, the time saving actually adds up pretty quickly. So I didn't get to test exporting that same project on my iMac Pro at work, but I imagine the export time is pretty similar to the way that M1 is performing. When it comes to web browsing, streaming videos, word processing, and other tasks that aren't like very CPU intensive, each of the iMacs seem to perform pretty similarly, except my 2013 iMac. It does take a little bit longer to launch programs and load web pages and such, but that can be expected from an older machine. I mean, this thing's like 7, 8 years old. Another complaint I've heard about the M1 iMac is that it only has 4 ports. And yeah, that's true. And that's if you get the mid-tier model. If you get the entry-level model, you're only getting 2 ports. And this really shouldn't come as a big surprise though, because Apple has been eliminating ports from their products for years now and basically making everything just USB-C, Thunderbolt 3 and 4. And for the most part, I think most of us Apple users are pretty used to that dongle life at this point, so it's really not that big of a shock here. For me, almost every accessory that I use is still USB 3.0. So I have a couple USB 3.0 to USB-C adapters here just plugged into the back, so I can still plug in all my external hard drives and a couple other accessories that use USB 3.0. I'm also using an adapter hub that adds an SD card reader and a micro SD card reader, which of course you've got to have for importing footage and photos and everything like that. It also has a couple extra USB ports and an HDMI port. On the mid-tier model, you get the extra Ethernet port on the power adapter. So even for just that alone, I would definitely get it over the entry-level model, because anyone that's constantly uploading and downloading large video files like we do all the time, it is super necessary to have a good hardwired Ethernet line, because there's nothing worse than crappy Wi-Fi when you're trying to download or upload like huge video files. Another issue I hear people complain about is the screen size. You know, it's only 24 inches and people say that's just not big enough. Yes, we'd all love the larger 27-inch screen that we're just so used to working on over the years, but I don't think that's coming until maybe later this year or early next year. And 24 inches, in my opinion, is still plenty of real estate for editing videos, and I've had no issues with seeing my timeline and preview window clearly. Now, of course, you can easily add a second monitor that is as big as you want if you still need more screen real estate to work with. Now, in order to do this, you will need to plug in an adapter that goes from Thunderbolt 3 to HDMI. Another issue I've heard way too much of is the bezels are white, and honestly, this is a non-issue. Yeah, we're all used to black bezels in 2021, and it's what we'd prefer, but how quickly did you all forget that most of the original iMacs had white bezels and no one complained about the design then? And really, to me, it's reminiscent of the old iPods and iPads with the white bezels. It really doesn't bother me, and if you have white walls behind your iMac, it's actually pretty cool because the bezels kind of tend to blend right in. Now, there were a few issues that I had when upgrading to the M1 iMac personally that I think you may run into as well, because anytime you upgrade your equipment, oftentimes you find that you have to change your accessories and software and everything like that, because some of them can become obsolete or incompatible. For instance, I'm not able to use my Blackmagic mini recorder anymore for live streaming because it uses Thunderbolt 2. And even when I use an adapter, it just does not register or work at all. So I've pretty much been forced to now upgrade to the Blackmagic Atom Mini Pro for live streaming. And yeah, it's a nice upgrade, but it's something to keep in mind because you may be forced to upgrade and buy some new things that you already had working on your old machine. Also, some software and plugins that you use might not be optimized or compatible with M1 yet. So I definitely recommend verifying the programs that you need to do your job all work on M1 before you make the switch. Now, if you have an older Intel iMac, even if it's fully spec'd out with the most RAM and an SSD, the M1 is likely going to outperform it or come really close, because the M1 really holds up so well even against my fully spec'd out iMac Pro that I use at work, and that just blew my mind how good it really is. Now, if you're thinking about getting the M1 Mac Mini because it's cheaper, you need to consider how your final cost is actually going to be very similar or even higher once you add a comparable 24-inch 4.5K monitor, speakers, a 1080p webcam, Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. All that adds up really quickly. So this is really a great deal. So besides working with a slightly smaller screen now and using way more dongles and adapters, there's really nothing else for me to complain about or stop me from using this full time. I really like the new M1 iMac, honestly, and I can absolutely recommend it to any professional video editor working in Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve. Now, I haven't personally tested it with Premiere Pro yet because I really don't use that program, but I've seen reviews from others that say it does work fine. All right, guys, if you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe right now because I have a ton more videos coming out in shooting, editing, lighting, gear reviews, everything like that, and you don't want to miss it. All right, I'll see you in the next video.